Thank you so much. Well, we have been making our way through the second part of the Kitab-i-Iqan. We're now on paragraph 171. So we are probably around getting close to two-thirds of the way through the Kitab-i-Iqan. The theme that we're dealing with right now is this theme of the return of the manifestations of God. This is the theme that we've been dealing with from about paragraph 150. And Baha'u'lláh has been tackling this in a number of different ways, but he's really divided the argument into two aspects. Is this return means, on the one hand, does it mean the physical return, or does it mean the spiritual return? And so he's really looking at this from this concept of the unity of the manifestations of God. The fact that the manifestations of God from one particular realm seem to be speaking with the same voice, are seated upon the same throne, proclaim the same faith, utter the same speech, that in that sense they are all one and the same. And this is the area where we're kind of looking at, is this concept of the unity of the manifestations of God. And we're coming up for this discussion where Baha'u'lláh will be talking about the distinctions between the manifestations of God, because there are distinctions, there are differences. But right now we're dealing with this realm of unity, which is has very profound implications as to what is meant by the messengers of God when they're speaking from this realm of unity. And Baha'u'lláh is using this context to delve into one of the most difficult themes that Baha'u'lláh has to tackle, which is namely this concept of the seal of the prophets. That in Islam there's this idea that, well, there's a statement in the Quran that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. And from that particular statement, there is this understanding that predominates in Islam that there's no more prophet supposed to come after Prophet Muhammad. So how does Baha'u'lláh deal with this? Well, he deals with this concept of talking about the unity of the messengers of God. Remember, in the very beginning of part 2 of the Kitab-i-Iqan, and also there's a little Easter egg in part 1 of the Kitab-i-Iqan, Baha'u'lláh mentions how all of the names and attributes are attributable to each of the manifestations of God. Even though they may not outwardly show that, their inward reality being the divine, therefore all names and attributes of God are reflected therein. And so Baha'u'lláh is using that to be able to show how these terms of being the first and the last are actually applicable to each of the manifestations of God. That if we see from this realm of oneness, this realm of unity, we can actually understand that when they're talking about being the first and being the last, they're not necessarily talking about chronological order, but they're actually talking about the reality being comprehensive of all things. So one of the famous statements that Jesus makes in the Bible is, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Alpha being the very first letter in the Greek alphabet, and Omega being the very last letter in the Greek alphabet. So this idea that all things, all knowledge is contained within them. That if they say that they're the first and that they're the last, they're basically saying, hey, I'm the beginning and the end. All things are contained within me, right? Just like a parent can look at a child and say, I am the beginning and end of all things for you. All your existence and your reality and your, whether we go out to dinner tonight or whether we, watch a movie, or all of those things revolve around the will of the parent. The parent can say, I'm the beginning and end of all things. They contain all of that within them. Or a teacher looking from that standpoint of their eternal nature, that teachers are something that always people have access to, whether it's in the beginning of their life with their kindergarten teacher, or much later on with their high school teacher, or the college professor, or whatever it ends up being. That spirit of being a teacher is something that isn't necessarily for one particular time point, but they can actually speak with this voice of being all of the teachers. And so they can make a statement where they say, look, the only way you're going to do well in life is by listening to me. They may be speaking with the voice of teachers in general, that you have to be able to submit yourself towards their will in order to be able to to be able to learn X, Y, and Z. And so you can speak with this different voice, this voice of unity. And so Baha'u'lláh is saying here that this concept of being the first and the last is not necessarily a chronological concept, but it's showing the comprehensive nature of the manifestations of God. And so this is really where we're tackling right now, is this concept of the seal of the prophets. So someone go ahead and read this one here, paragraph 171.
From these statements, therefore, it hath been made evident and manifest, that should a soul in the end that knoweth no end be made manifest, and arise to proclaim and uphold a cause, which in the beginning that hath no beginning, another soul hath proclaimed and upheld, it can be truly declared of him who is the last and of him who was the first, that they are one and the same, inasmuch as both are the exponents of one and the same cause. For this reason hath the point of the Bayan made the life of all else but him be his sacrifice. Liken the manifestations of God unto the sun, which though it rise from the beginning that has no beginning until the end that knoweth no end, is nonetheless the same sun. Now wert thou to say that this sun is the former sun, thou speakest the truth. And if thou sayest that this sun is the return of that sun, thou also speakest the truth. Likewise, from this statement it is made evident that the term last is applicable to the first, and the term first applicable to the last, inasmuch as both the first and the last have risen to proclaim one and the same faith.
Any thoughts?
This idea of the first and the last is really, if you can grasp that, it's really a powerful understanding of what the whole spiritual world is all about. That it's all one. It comes together as one. And the fact that so many of the great teachers have used this concept of the first shall be last, the last shall be first, the first and the last, Alpha and Omega. There's something really to this sense of completeness.
Right.
In gaining spiritual understanding.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, there's a statement by Baha'u'lláh where he says, this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And so, linking the past with the future in the present is something that's done with that statement. Is you're saying this isn't something we've never experienced before. It's not something that's disconnected from our future experience in the world. It's intricately associated with the very beginning of wisdom and the very end of wisdom. And so this is, I think, one of the reasons why the manifestations of God may speak in these voices of, like, I am the first of the prophets, but they can also say, I am the last of the prophets. And it doesn't mean that there are not more prophets that are going to come after that. It just means you're having this link or identity with the beginning and the end, with this eternal process of God's changeless faith of God. That we have this link that's put in by the manifestations of God. They're showing this linkage by claiming this identity with being the first and this identity with being the last. And it's very interesting, Baha'u'lláh makes this point as well, that people wouldn't have so much of an issue with this if Prophet Muhammad had said, I am the first of the prophets. If you take out, I am the seal of the prophets, and you put, I am the first of the prophets, then you're forced to see this from that standpoint of, oh, he's showing his identity with all of them. But you can likewise put, I am the last of the prophets in there, and then boom, now that creates that opportunity for people to accept or to deny. It gives that opportunity in there. So, Baha'u'lláh is saying, look, if you can claim to be the first of the prophets, and you understand that there's more prophets afterwards, why can't you also proclaim yourself to be the last prophet? It doesn't necessarily mean that the revelation of God has ended, that there's nothing else yet to come. And this is in accord with the other statement in the Quran where it talks about what were the problems that some of the Jewish individuals had with Prophet Muhammad claiming to be a prophet, they said that the hand of God is chained up, and there's no more revelation supposed to come. And so, in the Quran it makes a statement, well, chained up is their hands. That it's not God who's chained up, it's the interpretations that are made by people that end up constraining their own understanding of what revelation is supposed to be about in its continuous progressive nature.
Is that something that's in the Old Testament, being chained up?
I haven't seen it in the Old Testament. I haven't seen
that's okay. So that's something that Muhammad had said, this is what the Jews were saying.
That's correct. Yeah, this is an understanding that they had, was that, look, we have everything. We've got Moses. Moses are beginning and end. We've got the Torah. Like, what else do we need? And so we're kind of done. And this is the story of every revelation that's come. Every religion says, we've got all we need. We're done. And this is one of the things that Baha'is are actually warned against as well, is not falling into the same trap of saying, look, we have the revelation of Bahá'u'lláh, we're done. No, there's more revelation that's going to come. There's more unfoldment of truth that's going to happen, and we have to be, aware and ready for it whenever it does arise. And understanding that there are certain interpretations that we may have made that are now going to become hindrances from us to recognize the next manifestation of God. So what do we have to do? The first step is detach ourselves from all those man-made understandings. And if we have confusion on something, we're supposed to turn towards that point that claims to be truth and ask them that question. Just be fair about it. Ask that individual, what is the meaning behind these things.
Yeah, the whole idea of it ending up, the Lord shall pour a spirit upon the people of God. In the New Testament, the apostles it was written down to interpret. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
No more of that stuff.
Yeah.
They got it now.
Yeah.
Which is a huge misconception.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, limiting the power of God.
Yeah. So here are a few passages from both the Quran, from traditions, and also from the New Testament that deal with this concept. So the first one here, it says, He has ordained for you the religion which He enjoined upon Noah, and that which we have revealed to you, and that which we enjoined upon Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. And so you can see in the Quran there's this link between the revelation that was given to Prophet Muhammad and the same revelation that was given to the prophets of the past. There's no distinction between them from that standpoint. They're all part of the same religion. This is similar to Baha'u'llah's statement of this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And so, yeah, in one sense we can say, okay, let's talk about Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad as separate individuals. But you can see from this particular passage in the Quran, it's really talking from this vantage point of oneness, that these religions are all part of the same faith of God. And so if we're looking from that standpoint of unity, it makes no difference whether we're talking about Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, or whether we're just talking about this oneness, looking at it from this vantage point of unity, of oneness. They're all saying the same faith. They're all talking about the same religion. And this is why it says, in the Quran, it says, no other religion will be accepted from you other than Islam. And so we can look at that from the standpoint and say, oh, that means we're done. What is the Baha'i faith? It's called a different name, so therefore, since it's not called Islam, then we have to reject it. Or we can look at it from this vantage point, from where from how this passage was revealed in the Quran, which is this idea that all of the religions could be called Islam. Because Islam means to submit oneself to the will of God. And then, in fact, there are passages in the Quran where it says that the disciples of Jesus were Muslims. And so if we look at it from that vantage point of, Islam represents the religion that was brought by Prophet Muhammad, well, how do we now talk about the fact that these disciples of Jesus were Muslims before the Quran had actually been revealed? How does that make sense? The only way you can really understand it is looking from that vantage point of unity. These ones the next few come from traditions. Now, some of these traditions are more or less accepted by different sects of Islam. But there's this one here. This is one of my favorite ones. It says, I am the nearest, this is Prophet Muhammad's voice, I am the nearest of all the people to the Son of Mary. being Jesus. I am the nearest of all the people to the Son of Mary. So in a sense, he's showing his association with who he is, with who Jesus was. So this idea that Jesus is to return, and that identity being Prophet Muhammad, which is one of the themes of the Kitab-i-Iqan, we can see that that's affirmed in this particular passage. My favorite part about this, though, is the second line. He says, the prophets are paternal brothers. This is like one of my favorites. The prophets are paternal brothers. Their mothers are different, but their religion is one.
Oh, that's a great,
So, yeah.
Sahih al-Bukhari is a person, or is that a...
It's a collection of traditions. And it's actually a very well-respected collection of traditions. But again, these are traditions. But the prophets are all paternal brothers, meaning that they have one parent that they share and one parent that they don't share. And so the parent that they share is their religion. The faith of God is one and the same. But what is different is how that impacts, the impact between that one faith. And who are the mothers? The mothers are the capacity of the different communities that they're coming to. And so this faith of God has an interaction with the capacity of humanity, and the child of that is the specific religion that's born, that has something in common with the Father, which is the oneness of all faiths, but then something that's that's similar to the capacity of the people that they came to, which may be the laws and ordinances. And so one part is the same, one part is different. Yeah, if you try to take that literally, it becomes quite problematic.
It sure does.
In every prophet, there is a portion of the Mohammedan reality. Look at that one. And then we have this one. I am Adam, and Noah, and Abraham. I am Moses, and I am Jesus. I am the first, I am the last. You can see how easily that could go in there. This is part of that same concept of seeing the oneness behind the different religions. I was a prophet while Adam was between water and clay. Wow. So this eternal nature, we're talking about like the very beginning, right? Before Adam was even created, he was a prophet. Very similar statement to the one that's coming up, which we'll read, but it says, Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. Now, Abraham lived quite a long time before the coming of Jesus, and so this was quite a challenging statement for Jesus to make. Why did he make this statement? Because he's, again, showing this eternal faith of God, this identity with this ancient faith of God. There's a beautiful statement by Abdu'l-Baha, I should pull it up, but he basically says, ours is the old religion. He's talking about the Baha'i faith. He says, in referring to the Baha'i faith, he says, ours is the old religion. This is what the Baha'i faith is. It'd be interesting if someone asks us what the Baha'i faith is, if we actually use that in our description, ours is the old religion. That's what we, cling towards, is the old religion. And in one sense, that's absolutely true. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty. All things are contained within the reality of Jesus. And so we can see that these statements of beginning and end, I am the seal of the prophets, I am the first of the prophets, in this context of unity, make sense. If we try to take these same statements and we put them in the realm of linear time, they make no sense. How can Jesus say, before Abraham was, I am? That makes no sense. If we look at it in that sense and we see seal of the prophets, then we limit the revelation of God to one particular dispensation, and there's nothing to come after that. We see it in a different light. And so we have the opportunity to see reality in two different realms. One with the eye of unity, in which we see this as an eternal process, or with the realm of distinction, in which now this becomes a great barrier to us recognizing the truth. And we can see how the Word of God has these two different aspects to it that Baha'u'lláh has talked about before. It's like it's as sharp as a sword. It says, I think in the book of Hebrews, it's a two-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. So you can see how this one particular passage of Seal of the Prophets in one sense, opens the possibility for us to have a great understanding of who Prophet Muhammad was, and also accept the eternal nature of God and the eternal nature of revelation. Or if we see it from the other vantage point, it can completely blind us from that truth. In the same way, the sun, which for the last few weeks hasn't been out, but now is out, actually, so it's pretty impressive, after 2 weeks of gray and fog. The light that comes from the sun, at the one hand, it provides guidance to us. It allows us to be able to see. But at the same token, if we're not ready for the light, and I don't know if you've had this experience when you drive like early in the morning, you turn the corner and the light hits you and then all of a sudden you can't see. Well, how is that thing that's supposed to allow you to see not allow you to see? Is because you're not ready for it. You're not prepared for it. It's too bright. And so there are these two-edged qualities to the sunlight. On the one hand, it makes you see better than anything, and it can blind you more than anything as well. It has this double-edged potency to it. And this term, Seer of the Prophets, also has this double-edged property to it. On the one hand, it allows us to be able to recognize the true divinity of the messengers of God and see that this is them talking from this realm of unity, or we see it from the realm of distinction, and then we say, okay, revelation is done. And I think one of the points that Bahá'u'lláh makes is every religion has fallen into this trap of our religion is the end.
Yeah.
With Judaism, Christianity, Islam, we've always done that. This is one of the lessons that hopefully we've learned from history, if we come from any of these religious backgrounds, of how that clinging to that understanding that that was the end prevented people from recognizing the religion with which we stand identified. And so it becomes problematic if having that particular vantage point. So I think Bahá'u'lláh is saying, look, this is a problematic way of looking at it. Plus, it doesn't really fit, with this concept of the realm of unity. It makes much more sense to view it in that light, and therefore, this is the more accurate interpretation behind Seal of the Prophets.
I just have a quick question. Hadith, what is that reference?
I don't. I'll need to find the exact reference. But Hadith is just a term for traditions.
Oh, okay.
So in Islam, you have the Quran, which is the absolutely authenticated repository of the Word of God, is how Shoghi Effendi describes it. It's the Word of God itself. And then things that people may have heard Prophet Muhammad say, or sometimes some of his descendants, Imam Ali and some of the Imams, these become traditions. They become oral traditions that aren't accepted as the corpus of sacred scripture, but they may be inspired. There may be guidance in them. There may be elucidations that can be useful. And so those things were compiled. Like a book of quotes, yeah. And the way in which they would do it was very interesting, is that because people would come up with all kinds of quotes, and it became questionable as to which ones should be included and which ones may have been made up, because there were people who were just making things up and putting it in the name of Prophet Muhammad and so forth. And so what they ended up doing was they created this lineage of where the quotes came from. So it might be, Ghane said, that Davy said, that Trish said, that Nassim said, who had been in the presence of the Prophet, had said that. And then what they would do is they would go back through and say, well, how reputable a person was Nassim? Well, Nassim was with the Prophet all the time, and has a number of she's got good qualities and she's a good person, and Trish was also a great person, and Davy too, but Ghane's really sketchy, and he makes things up all the time, and so it would be a doubtful tradition. And so you would do it based off of not only how many people it had to go through, but also what was the qualities like of those particular individuals. Yeah.
Is this analogous to Pilgrim's Notes, where
Yes.
people go on pilgrimage and they say wonderful things about Abdu'l-Baha or about Shoghi Effendi, and they can compile it and they can write it, but we have to understand where it came from. It's not the Abdu'l-Baha speaking, it's just somebody's experience.
Yeah, and different Muslims will look at traditions in different ways. There's some that are very anti-traditions, that the Quran is all we need, that's it, and any of these other things is blasphemy. And then there are some people who actually elevate the traditions to be as high as the Quran itself. And so that becomes problematic. So, what Baha'u'lláh had to contend with was not the Quran. That was fine. He was happy to elucidate on those things. But it was these traditions, some of which were quite dubious, that people had, that he ended up having to explain certain things about.
Is there something analogous to that in Christianity, or is most of Christianity analogous to that?
Yeah, it's like all the whole.
Yeah, that's a very good point. There's a lot of Gospels that didn't make it into the canon. There are a lot of Book of Acts that also didn't make it into the canon. There are a lot of letters of Paul and Peter, and there are books of Revelation that never made it into the actual canon of what we have now as the New Testament.
And the Catholics pick and choose?
Well, so what ended up happening is each community had their own kind of thing that they would have, and they would oftentimes, to show their, the authenticity of it, they would label it as, oh, this is the Gospel of Peter, or this is the Gospel of this person. And, whether it ended up, coming down the history of, oh, well, this person particularly wrote it, that Peter actually wrote this Gospel of Peter. But, the reality is that these were probably traditions that were carried down generations, and people would write it down, and then they would put it in the name of that person. Or, a letter would come out, and they'd be like, oh, this sounds like something that Paul would have written, so we'll call this, one of Paul's letters. And, and it was probably well-meaning, and I think there was probably some, trying to insist upon a particular interpretation and give it authenticity by doing that. But what you ended up having very early on in Christianity in the first 100 or so years is you had so many Gospels, so many different ways of describing the life of Jesus and what it meant, and all of these things, that eventually there were councils that were put together to try to figure out, well, which ones are the authentic ones.
Yeah.
And so this is why you have, it's very interesting, when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're very similar sounding Gospels. There's not that much difference between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're actually known as the synoptic Gospels because they're seen with the same eye. The same stories, just, very minor changes between them, but they represented different communities that obviously had a lot of weight in these councils that were put together to try to figure out what was authentic and what was not.
Those councils and the conferences and all that sort of, okay, this is law.
Yeah.
This is what really happened, and we, still to say, oh, it was like 300 years after Christ. We're like, that's 300 years.
Yeah, and it was decisions that were, man-made. It was councils that were kind of locked in the room, and weren't allowed to come out until they figured out what the truth was. And so this is where a lot of the doctrines came from in Christianity, is that they weren't. Yeah, all of the doctrines that we actually say are now articles of faith as being a Christian, the reason that they're kind of so insistent upon them being articles of faith was because there was actually so much contention around these subjects that they eventually had to say, okay, well, this is what we believe, this is the Trinity, and this is who Jesus is, and this is how we describe him, and all those things, not because it was well established, but because it was poorly established, and there was so much conflict among the early Christian communities as to what these things actually meant. And so Constantine especially, really wanted to create unity among the Christians, and so kind of forced them to come up with what Christianity actually looked like, and then everything else was crushed. Yeah. Everything else was, and this is why now, a few thousand years later, people are finding these urns dug in Egypt or something like that, where now they're, digging them up, and it's these different Gospels or so forth that people were trying to keep for a future time because they were supposed to be destroyed. And so they would keep them there, and then they would bury them there, and now these have been unearthed, and we've got all of these different accounts of who Jesus was. Some very fascinating ones.
The Gospel of Thomas is one of those.
The Gospel of Thomas. If you want to see one of the interesting ones, it's called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. That one is really interesting. That's where Jesus is playing with other children, and I forget, one of them breaks something, and he strikes that person down, that kid down. I mean, there's some very interesting alternative narratives of who Jesus was and what this is all about. But yeah, these would be in that same realm of traditions or so forth. It's what people think it was, but there's no good for sure understanding of what it is. Yeah. All right, we're on paragraph 172.
Notwithstanding the obviousness of this theme, in the eyes of those that have quaffed the wine of knowledge and certitude, yet how many are those who, through failure to understand its meaning, have allowed the term seal of the prophets to obscure their understanding and deprive them of the grace of all its manifold bounties. Hath not Muhammad himself declared, I am all the prophets? Have he not said we have already mentioned, I am Adam, Noah, Moses, and Jesus? Why should Muhammad, that immortal beauty, who has said, I am the first Adam, be incapable of saying also, I am the last Adam? For even as he regarded himself as the first of the prophets, that is Adam, in like manner, the seal of the prophets is also applicable unto that divine beauty. It is admittedly obvious that being the first of the prophets, he likewise is their seal. It's obvious, huh?
Well, now it makes sense.
So I am all the prophets, right? I think that's a very beautiful statement by Prophet Muhammad. Could be said by any of the messengers of God. I am all the prophets. What better way to illustrate that you are everything, than to identify yourself as the first and the last? That's the way that you show you're comprehensive, as you say, I am the first and the last. So the statement in the Quran that I am the seal of the prophets, is a beautiful illustration from a Baha'i standpoint of this idea of the unity of the messengers of God, that they are all speaking from that realm of unity. I am the first, I am the last. I am the beginning, I am the
I
end.
don't know why I have to bring marine animals into this whole thing.
What? Oh, the seal. Oh. Oh. All right. Okay. You have to suffer with this at home? Is this right, Katie? I'm so sorry. There are support groups for... Yeah. Have you seen that? There's actually I've seen these Instagram reels where they have these kids who talk about the trauma early on in life, and it was a lot of it was like all these particular reels are them interacting with their dad, and they said something and it comes into a dad joke, and they're just completely scarred by that for the rest of their life. All right.
So all prophets can be considered the first and the last.
Yeah. I mean, what better way of saying all the prophets? Like, I am all the prophets. This is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. Why couldn't Bahá'u'lláh have said, this is the changeless faith of God? Done. No, he's illustrating it by saying eternal in the past, eternal in the future. By showing, from the very beginning to the very end, it is all one and the same faith. And so the prophets of God can say, I am Adam, or I was a prophet before Adam was between water and clay, or he can make the statement of, I am the last of the prophets. And it doesn't necessarily imply that there's no revelation that's going to come after that. It's showing this continuity when we're viewing this from the realm of unity.
One of the quotes you had before said about the prophet and all the prophets, there is some Muhammadan reality.
Yes.
And that would be true of all the religions. In every prophet, there's a piece of Christianity, a piece of Judaism, all of that.
And it really is reflective of spiritual maturity. There is no beginning or end to it.
Yeah.
It is ongoing.
Yeah. And this is, I've been reading through the Seven Valleys, and today I was sitting at Temple Coffee reading through the Valley of Unity. The thing that's interesting about the Seven Valleys has the same themes as the Kitab-i-Iqan. It's the same text, actually. Same thing with the hidden words. The hidden words, the Seven Valleys, the Kitab-i-Iqan, all have the same themes within them. And it would be very interesting to create a course around the interweaving of these different themes throughout it. But this is one of the things that Baha'u'lláh is talking about with this realm of unity, this valley of unity that we enter into. And it says here on paragraph 56, no, 56. Gosh, my eyes. 56, sorry. Wow. And they swim in the sea of the Spirit and soar in the holy atmosphere of light. Then what existence have words on such a plane that first and last, or other than these, should be mentioned or described? In this realm the first is the same as the last, and the last is the same as the first. He's talking about this realm of unity. If we're looking from this vantage point of unity, where Baha'u'lláh is taking us in the Kitab-i-Iqan, the same vantage point of unity, these names of first and last and seeing these things in order, if we're seeing the oneness behind things, we don't have that same vision. If we see all of our teachers as one and the same reality of trying to guide us towards truth, then to say, oh, this is my kindergarten teacher versus my third grade teacher versus my 12th grade teacher is in one sense blasphemous. We don't look at it from that standpoint. They're all one and the same. They're all teaching the same reality. And you can interchange, you can take them and interchange those teachers, and it doesn't change the reality of what the educational system was.
Did you say 56?
I believe so. That's my best guess based off of what my eyes are allowing me to see. We read this?
No.
Okay, let's read this. Paragraph 173.
The mystery of this theme hath in this dispensation been a sore test unto all mankind. Behold, how many are those who, clinging to these words, have disbelieved him, who is their true revealer. What, we ask, could people presume the terms first and last, then referring to God, glorified be his name, to mean? If they maintain that these terms bear reference to this material universe, how could it be possible when the visible order of things is still manifestly existing? Nay, in this instance, by first is meant no other than the last, and by last no other than the first.
It's the same theme that was brought up in possibly paragraph 56 of Seven Valleys. All right, let's keep going along this theme. Who's up?
Even as the beginning that hath no beginnings, the term last is truly applicable unto him who is the educator of the visible and of the invisible. In like manner are the terms first and last applicable unto his manifestations.
Yeah, so let's just pause here for a second. If we view this, the analogy that Baha'u'lláh keeps on talking about is this analogy of the sun. And so if we see the sun, we can look at it and say, that's the first sun. And we can look at it and say, that's the last sun, and you're saying the same thing. Or you can also say, that's the sun of 2025, or December, what does it say? Does it say December 14th, right? You could say, and all of those are true. It's the first sun, it's the last sun. It depends upon the vantage point that we're seeing it from. And so if we're seeing it from this vantage point of unity of eternity, even as in the beginning that hath no beginnings, the term last is truly applicable unto him who is the educator of the visible and of the invisible. In like manner, the terms first and last applicable unto his manifestations. So if we look at the sun, we can make that same statement of, hey, that's the first sun, hey, that's the last sun, or you can say it's the sun of December 14th, 2025. And all of those statements are true depending upon one's vantage point. Sorry.
They are at the same time the exponents of both the first and the last. While it's established upon the seat of the first, they occupy the throne of the last. Were a discerning eye to be found, it will readily perceive that the exponents of the first and the last, of the manifest and the hidden, of the beginning and the seal, are none other than these holy beings, these essences of detachment, these divine souls. And wert thou to soar in the holy realm of God was alone, there was none else besides him, thou wilt find in that court all these names utterly non-existent and completely forgotten. Then thine eyes no longer be obscured by these veils, these terms and allusions. How ethereal and lofty is this station unto which even Gabriel, unshepherded, could never attain, and the bird of heaven, unassisted, can never reach. Seems like it's going beyond the realm or the valley of unity into this valley of utter nothingness.
Yeah, so there's realms of, and this is one of the beautiful things about the seven valleys, is that, you know, unity isn't the end goal.
Yeah.
There are realms beyond that. There's existences beyond that. You start thinking, oh, well, what's beyond the valley of love? You know, how can there be anything more resplendent than that? And then you get to the other valleys of knowledge and unity, and then even unity is just the beginning of a whole new way of looking at reality. And so, like, one way that we can see it is, and there's different terms in Arabic for this, but there's different realms of oneness that one can see in. You know, we can look at, you know, an example that I heard, which I thought was very useful, is you can look at a map of the world, and you can see all of the lines and boundaries that we've drawn up, depicting the different countries that exist in the world, and we can look at that and say all of these are one. And that's one level of unity, is you're seeing the differences as part of one and the same thing. And then there's another thing where you don't even see the lines anymore. The lines don't exist. You're not saying they're all part of one. You're saying these lines don't even make any sense. They're artificially put in there. They're man-made. And so to see, you know, you can even see two different realms of unity within that. One is a unity of all the countries are one, and the other one is, why are we even talking about countries? That's blasphemous to talk on that particular plane. And so there's two different aspects, and this is reflected in different Arabic terms for unity, of you know, where you're seeing the differences as one, which is unity, but then you're not even seeing any differences, which is even a higher form of unity. And so we can see all of these names of the manifestations of God as being one, right? They are the merciful, the just, the first, the last, the hidden, the seen, the manifest, the this, the that. Or you can go beyond that and say, none of those names actually really describe those manifestations of God. They're beyond that. There's this level of oneness where those things are kind of like the way that we're depicting the different you know, geographic regions on a map, and we're outlining things and saying this is all part of one and the same essence. That's true in one sense. In another sense, those names and attributes of God have nothing to do with God himself. It's beyond those things. Mm-hmm. Too high art thou for the praise of those who are nigh unto thee to ascend into the heaven of thine nearness, or the birds of the hearts.
Who are devoted to thee, may ascend to the door of thy gate.
To the door of thy gate. So we can't even get to the door of the gate, right? And there are other passages in the long obligatory prayer where it just talks about how the names and attributes, you know, God is exalted beyond that. And so and I think Bahá'u'lláh is inviting us to this other way of viewing reality, where we're seeing things not with the idea that all of these names are applicable to the manifestations of God, but in one sense, this shows our limitation. And, you know, what does first and last have to do with God? What does, you know, from that realm, where does that belong? First and last is a product of time, which is something that was created by God. And so why are we limiting who God is by something that he himself created? It's a different way of viewing reality. And so Bahá'u'lláh is inviting us to perhaps this even higher way of viewing it, where even the names and attributes don't have any connection with the reality itself.
I was wondering about the bird of heaven.
Yeah.
Is that similar to the dove of the Spirit? Is that?
Yeah, it probably has a similar, like the one in Christianity where the Holy Spirit comes down. Yeah, I think they could have similar understandings. You know, the bird of heaven, a lot of times Bahá'u'lláh is using these analogies of the divine realm to talk about his revelation, because this is one of the themes that I think we've talked about, and maybe we're going to talk about, where paradise, the description of paradise, is oftentimes thought about to mean, well, what happens to us after we die? And we get to die, and then if we're a good person, we go to heaven, and if we're a bad person, we go to hell. And there's all these descriptions of what paradise looks like. And so the description of paradise is sometimes this very shaded place, which is probably very useful for Arabs who are living in the desert to have this as an idea. It's a place with eternal shade. So there's this tree, and it's actually part of the description in Islam, is this tree that grows in paradise. It's this massive tree that has branches and offshoots and leaves that cover the entire canopy. They just have this canopy that covers the entire heaven in the next world, and that there are these rivers that run through it, and there are these birds that are on this tree in the next world that are warbling beautiful melodies, and all these kinds of descriptions of what the next world is supposed to be looking like. Baha'u'lláh says that most of these descriptions of paradise do not necessarily represent what we're go to in the next world. Obviously there's going to be those kinds of things of a beautiful existence or whatever for those individuals who believe, but Baha'u'lláh says that they're primarily meant to describe the next revelation of God. So entrance into the revelation is entrance into paradise. And so this is why Baha'u'lláh is using a lot of these same kind of analogies here. Oh, this is the bird of heaven. And sometimes he refers to himself as the bird of heaven. Sometimes he refers to himself as the tree, the Sadratul Muntaha. Sometimes he refers to, his descendants as the branches, the Ahsan, and the twigs, the Afnan, and the leaves of the woman. Yeah, exactly. And so you can see how, even in the person of Baha'u'lláh himself, he's generating this paradise through the person of Baha'u'lláh. This paradise is being generated. What does it say? What's that hidden word? Give me a second. This is the river of everlasting life. That's something that's expected in the next world, is this river of everlasting life. He says, this is the river of everlasting life that hath flowed from the wellspring of the pen of the merciful. Well is it with them that drink. So what is the wellspring? What is this river that comes out in the next world? It's the revelation of God. It's the word of God coming out from the root of the tree, from the coming of the manifestation of God. And so you can see how Baha'u'lláh has redefined all of these understandings of what heaven looks like to actually be a reference not to some future state, but to the revelation of God coming out. And so you'll see this oftentimes in Baha'u'llah's writings, where he refers to these descriptions of paradise as being things that we can actually experience through the revelation and through coming to recognize who Baha'u'lláh is.
Amen. This is just coming to me as you were talking about this, so I want to just see what you think, what everybody here thinks. So this paragraph feels like it's Baha'u'lláh talking about the oneness by describing his relationships with the other manifestations in the realm of manifestation. And so we're just thinking about it as a model for oneness with manifestations, kind of coming to the seven valleys, where he's invoking this oneness, but as a path for us and our relationships with each other. Just a thought, like, here's a model of how manifestations are all one. And then with the seven valleys being a path of spiritual growth for us, this theme of oneness is kind of an invitation to do this here. Kind of, I don't know.
I think it's absolutely right. Yeah, and this is something that Baha'u'lláh, I think, touches on in this in one of the tablets called the Surah of the Temple, the Surah Hekal, where he talks about how he's generated these temples in the world that we're now supposed to bring forth from that example other temples in this world of existence. And so he builds these, it's a very beautiful tablet, because he builds these temples in a number of different ways. Temple can represent the physical temple of where people go to worship. That's one understanding. Another understanding of temple can refer to the physical body of the manifestation of God, their reality. And so one of the things he'll talk about is he'll start building this temple through the hands of this temple, the eyes of this temple, the head of this temple, the feet of this temple, and goes through different analogies of what these things represent. Then he builds the temple through the actual letters themselves that make up the word temple, which is H-Y-K-N-L, Heikal. And he describes what each of those letters actually means and builds those up. But he builds it up to show the manifestation of God, but as an example of what we're supposed to be doing in our own understanding, our own way of doing it. So for example, he'll talk about the feet of the manifestation of God. And this is something that's talked about in the book of Revelation. It says, brass-like were his feet. And when the return of Jesus is supposed to come, he's supposed to come with brass feet, which sounds very heavy. It's like that's going to be very, very heavy shoes to be wearing, but brass-like were his feet. Bahá'u'lláh interprets that in Gems of Divine Mysteries to mean that this is talking about the steadfastness of the return of Jesus, his steadfastness. And so you can see the steadfastness of the Bab, you can see the steadfastness of Bahá'u'lláh. In spite of tests, they persevered. What does that do? Through their perseverance, we now gain perseverance through their example. They provide the examples of all of these qualities and attributes. And so I think in the same way that, yes, we have in the realm of the manifestations of God two versions of how we're supposed to view them. One is the realm of distinction, where they have different names and attributes, they came to different people, they have this, and that's a true reality. There's nothing wrong with that reality. But we also have to understand that there's a higher reality of that they're speaking from this realm of oneness. And from that state of oneness, to see distinction is not a good thing. And so it depends on where we're oriented towards. And I think this is kind of the pattern of Bahá'u'lláh is putting for the oneness of humanity, is that we have to see within every single individual the divine, and nothing but the divine within every individual. But we also understand that and this is very beautifully portrayed in a number of different analogies in the Seven Valleys, that even though we can see the light within every individual, how that light reflects depends upon the quality and who that individual is. Bahá'u'lláh says, in a crystal, the light turns into fire. He says if it impacts something that's red, it becomes red. It puts that in it. If it impacts a mirror, you see the disk of the sun itself reflected in it. And so everything has a unique way of reflecting this divinity, which is beautiful to see all of these different manifestations in this world of reality of how the divine can be manifested. The diversity behind it is a beautiful thing, because that diversity is pointing us back towards this realm of the fact that we're all reflecting the light in different ways, and we're all getting to see what that light looks like in many different capacities. And so each individual is a unique reflection of the names and attributes of God within us. So each one of us is a unique expression of the love of God to humanity. And if we view humanity from that standpoint, that's an incredibly powerful way to view one another, that every single individual is a unique reflection of God within creation. And we'll never see anything like it. That's a beautiful way to hopefully look at individuals. But we also view with the realm of oneness as well, where we don't see those distinctions, we just see the light within them. And so we're asked to, it's the synthesis of those two things that is probably the best way to look at things.